What are you holding on to coming out of this season and heading into your next one, whatever that means for you? What's useful and something that you've recently experienced in what you would call a season, and what's not useful? That's today's question for the Prolific Shift Sunday Sit Down. We're at episode 21. I am Janae Peters. I am the founder, CEO, Executive Director, Chief Operating Officer, Lead Secretary, editor, all the things for Prolific Shifts. Today's episode is a little different. So I went on Instagram Live with one of my favorite people, Shakira Rahim, who's another educator and with whom I went to college and worked with at some point. And Shakira is one of the points of origin for Prolific Shifts, so it felt particularly special to be spending time in conversation with her around this week's question. So check out our video. It is a little long, but it might be worth it. There might be something in there for you. There's a lot in there about what it means to ground and center ourselves, what it means to create intention around growth in space. So, hey, Shakira. Thank you so much. I've never been on a live, but I don't know if do you follow Black Girls Teach or Teach Me D or anything like that? If not, you should.
Oh, I know. I'm about to write that down. Black Girls Teach and what?
And Teach Me D. So D of Fogarty, and I hope I'm saying your last name right, D, created the Black Girls Teach, and there's like this Black Girls Teach Empowerment Circle, and then there's also Teach Me D, and all of it is about using social media or positioning yourself on social media to leverage change as Black educators. And so in one of our consultations last week, she was like, I'm gonna need you to go live sometimes. I was like, okay. And so Shakira, that's why I connected with you and said, hey, you wanna go live with me? Because this is easier for me than talking to myself. Well, and because Prolific Shifts, you're part of the origin story for me. That conversation that we had. And I guess I would say all the conversations we have tend to be things where I'm like, people should hear this. So yeah, just grateful to have you in the space today, and especially just knowing that it's in between a couple blocks of busy days for you. Shakira, who are we? Who are we? We're educators. We are also so much more. How do you want to introduce yourself to people for these purposes?
Wow. My name is Shakira, and it's interesting, right? Because we're so many different things, and as educators, this is like my long disclaimer, but I appreciate slowing down and being intentional about recognizing who we are and who we bring into our classroom, into our spaces every day. And so it's a powerful question because I'm a lot of things, but I don't necessarily have time to go through all of that, right? And so what can I bring into this space that is liberatory for me, but then also allows me to make a human connection with you and people watching? I am an educator. I'm a mindfulness practitioner. I'm a student. I'm a good friend of Janae's. And I'm just constantly trying to learn and grow. And I'm a seeker. I'm looking for ways to heal, ways to learn in community, and ways to just be able to show and hold space for compassion. Yeah.
I love that introduction. I think in offering who I am, because I'm still getting with the social media part of things, and part of that is too like I'm like very much resisting being like beholden to it, and I know that you don't have to be. Like to me, I don't want to get in the mode like gotta post, gotta do this. But I'm actually on the opposite end of the spectrum, like haven't posted, need to do things. But if in introducing myself in this space, I think the most important part to me include like being a Black woman for this, because I am an educator, and in my 12th year as an educator, have wanted to teach since before I started school myself. Like there are videos of me saying, I want to teach my siblings everything I learned at big girl school or whatever before I even went. But I had this this idea that something big was going to happen in that space, and I needed to share it with others. And I think being a Black woman in these spaces, in the spaces where I've ended up in as an educator, has a particularly, I don't want to say loaded, maybe loaded, particularly complex experience that comes with it, given that education is a system that was built on the structures of racism, patriarchism, and everything else that's there. Being who I am in those spaces matters. But I'll say here, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. I'm a Black woman really trying to figure out how to create spaces for Black people that engage our personal growth and development in addition to any professional growth and development that we have, because these places weren't designed for us, there's not a lot that's for us here. So that's what we're about, and that's my introduction.
Yes.
And Shakira and I, we also have a multifaceted boarding school in New England. I didn't live there. No, I didn't live there. We lived in the same apartment, just different years, and we stayed connected throughout the years. And as I mentioned a little earlier, Shakira was really part of the origin story for Prolific Shifts. We were having a conversation. I think you said something like, you should do something with this. And I was like, should I? All right. And here we are. So Shakira is one of the best hype people that you could ask for. All right. So Shakira, I'm using this right now for this week's Sunday Sit Down. And so as you might remember, I ask a question and then offer an action item. And so the question for this week asks, what are you holding on to coming out of this season? And I guess, what are you sorry, I'm just going to rewind that. What are you holding on to coming out of this season as you head into the next one? And as you reflect on this season, what's been useful and what's not been useful? And I'll answer too, but yes, and we can also make it conversational, but so whatever.
Okay, cool. I'm down to make it conversational. Also, so happy and honored that you invited me to do this. This is exciting. It's crazy. I think what's most helpful is like a big lesson that I learned that I think as an educator, I've kind of just taken for granted and haven't really applied to my life that much. But I realized, like, being a girl, when you water things, like, and you intentionally try to work towards something, it might take time, you might not see it, but we can cultivate growth. It's a real possibility. And I feel like I've been trying to find myself as an educator, find my voice, hold space and mindfulness and yoga, and just trying to combine the things that matter to me. And not really feeling like, just kind of feeling, for a long time I felt like it was kind of messy. But the truth is, things have to be messy. You got to put it out in order for you to like rearrange and see how things connect. And I feel like it's slowly, like I'm feeling the connections being made, even being here with you now and being able to have this conversation, right? So knowing that as long as I keep making an effort and being intentional, things are going to grow and goodness is going to come out of my efforts.
Yeah, something I heard in what you said, it was like that cultivation, the intention. Like, we don't, like, I think sometimes we're just like, why isn't this thing happening? And we're forgetting the work that we have to put into the happening. And I don't mean like, why isn't like racism changing? But I guess it counts for that too for some people. But like, some things are happening to us, and then there are the things that we can plant for ourselves. The things that we can be cultivating that really are about like, how we are building our worlds in the ways that are within our control. And one of the things that you said about the messiness, I think sometimes when things get like feel messy or feel complex, right? I know I personally am just like, ooh, messy. Gonna do something else. And in some situations, right, it could be really valuable to see what that mess is about, right? In some situations, not all situations, but in some situations, it's useful to see, all right, this is looking messy, but what can I see in this? Can I see a pathway? Like, what would it take to create a pathway out of here? And I kind of like the imagery that was coming up for me as I heard you talking a little bit about that.
Yeah, it can be scary, right? But when we think about healing, that's where the healing lives, right? Because we kind of clean it up a little bit. You're acknowledging, okay, this is my, you're picking and choosing what you want to engage with. You have agency in that way, right? So
Yeah.
there's so much that can come out of it.
Yeah.
And I think you talk about, for us Black educators, Black women, and in some of these predominantly white spaces, sometimes like we're so exhausted giving ourselves and fighting and resisting things to just kind of just show up and show our humanity, that we don't really have time to cultivate within ourselves and deal with and heal what's going on for us.
Yeah.
So that's really important. I
Yeah.
think
So,
that's
Kaylin just signed on. Hey, Kaylin. Kaylin is big on teacher self-care and boundaries and thinking about all of that. And Teach for the Culture is also on here, I think still was on here, and is big on really thinking about what it looks like given the gifts that we have in our culture, what it looks like to teach for the culture, not just to the culture, but like for it. Like what does it look like to be engaging anti-racist practices in every aspect of everything. And so I think a lot of what you said is wrapped up in a lot of what they do and offer too. That piece of, I think the thing I've been really mulling over is really just thinking, I think so many things feel outside of our control, and I've been really trying to hone into like, oh, you are here, thank you. I've been honing into the like what is within our control, and what can no one take away from me, in this space, and how can I attend to that? But if I'm answering this question, what am I holding on to coming out of this season and heading into the next? This season, if I count this season, the pandemic feels like its own season, but I also I'd be trying not to give it too much weight either. But if I say this season as in this semester, right, August to now, I think that one of the things that has really been like, I'm teaching ninth graders right now, ninth graders and a couple 10th graders, but all of my advisees, my wayfinding students are 10th graders, but the ninth graders are different this year and they are saying what they mean. Like I had a student on Friday, we had a harvest festival, and a student came up to me, and I'm good at downplaying a compliment, but it was a Black student, and she came up to me, she's like, Ms. Peters, I'm gonna miss having you in class next semester. I was like, oh yeah, you're gonna have a great time in your next class, like it's gonna be fine. She said, no, I'm gonna miss having you as my teacher. And I was like, she's like, I'm sure it's gonna be fine, but what I'm saying is I'm gonna miss having you as my teacher. And I was just like, I get it, and thank you. I just said thank you for that, and I'm gonna miss having you because I see you. And one of the things I'm thinking about, or something that I'm really taking away from this semester, is I think I will maintain this forever, the importance of audacity. Like I think of some of the things that our students present to us and the kind of audacity that they engage, that is very easy for us to not engage. Like just saying what they mean, saying what they feel, being messy. I'm thinking of particular situations where students are saying this is not working for me, or particular situations where a teacher or a student is saying, or my colleague is saying, I wonder what this feels like for you, given your positionality. And so when I think of things that have felt useful in this semester, it's really engaging that audacity. It's remembering the power of saying what needs to be said and saying what's true for you. And that still sounds a little cliche to me, because I think I mean it deeply. Like if what I'm thinking is I need to have better boundaries around my time and care, that doesn't mean just saying it, right? It means putting something into it, cultivate, having the audacity to cultivate that growth, having the audacity to be intentional about that growth. And I think that really does matter to me.
I love that. Because I think it takes a lot of courage, having that audacity. Whew. I had to have a challenging conversation earlier this week. As in my new role as an admin, now I'm also kind of advising faculty and staff, and ultimately remembering that what the students need is my goal. Trying to support the students is the goal. And so I found myself in a situation I was giving a white body person feedback, and they were not here for it.
Mm-hmm.
And just recognizing how they were responding to me and my body was challenging, because it kind of triggered, like when a white male is cutting you off and all of those things, like what does that do for you? In my role as an admin now, trying to give some feedback on class management. And, so all of that to say, in those moments, I had to have the audacity to stand up and say what the students needed.
Yeah.
And just doing that, like that back and forth, that pushing into advocating for the students and the impact that can have, it's just, it's like a whole other layer, like, dang, okay, how are you responding to this? And making sure that people are keeping students or being student-centered, right? Like, so putting the ego aside.
Yeah. I hear you say that, like, this is for the students, but one thing I wonder, and I think especially given your inclination towards mindfulness, like your practices, yoga with Shakira, right? In those moments, how do you center yourself? And I mean, like, both, like, how do you ground yourself, but also, like, how do you center your needs in that space too? Because I also, over time, have been thinking a lot about what we mean when we, like, what it means to center something or someone. Oh, thank you, Teach, for the culture. Or what it means to center something or someone. And I know my orientation for so long had been, this is about the students, and it 100% is. But I think when it's when some folks hear that, then that's also how we end up doing all that extra labor. That's also how we get burnt out and and don't sustain ourselves. So, but when you're in those moments, and we know we can name many more, but how are you in those moments? Like, what helps you to get through, and how do you center yourself?
I appreciate that. That's a good question. I remember asking you years ago, like, Janae, what do you do before the first day of class? Because, like, teachers around the world, before the first day of school, we're jittery and we're all, and it's like there isn't a formula to, like, show up and just be like, I'm cruising through. And one of the things that I started to do right now, I have my own office for the first time, and I have pictures of my parents in there. They're both deceased, but I have invited my ancestors into that space. And I try to, they're on my desk. One of them in their traditional Yoruba clothing, and one of them in a hip, bell bottoms when they moved to this country, looking all fly, like a Shaft movie. But just like knowing that their knowledge, their wisdom, and what they've brought is here, I carry that with me. And that's one of the things you mentioned, what no one can take away. That's one of the things no one can take away. What I have inherited internally from my parents and my ancestors, that knowledge, that love. And so I try to focus on my breath, and try to set my intentions. And like when this teacher was kind of pushing back at me, I had to ask myself, like, am I in my seat right now, or am I scattered? And so even noticing if I'm not in my seat, I don't need to be hard on myself. I need to show grace. But even noticing if I'm not necessarily grounded, or if something has shaken me, noticing that and taking time to just breathe. One of the things I started doing this week because of a retreat that I'm on is hating on myself. And so, like, I start, rubbing my heart and just, like, showing myself some love, shaking and rubbing things off. If there's energy and there's some forces that are foreign and there's residue from something else, just kind of shaking it off and knowing that I can protect myself and my space. So I've been touching myself more.
Yeah.
Touching the ground.
I love that. Tweet. I think one of the things I think about too is I have one of those brains. I don't think it's uncommon, but it's not super common. I think it's called edactic. So, like, I kind of have my brain works visually. So, like, when I'm talking right now, I can see the words that I'm going to say going across. And the times where I'm not when someone has taken me out of my hookup, I can't see anything. And I'm kind of like searching, just kind of like feeling, like actually feeling lost. And I have come to recognize that as moments where I need to take, like, the thing that has worked more than anything else is taking a breath. And I think sometimes, like, if I get too hyped, I'm just like, oh, I'm like responding and I'm mad. Like, how are they still racist? Because that's what we are. And I'm like, but I can't see what's coming for me, like inside me. And so I have to quiet everything around me in order to start seeing the words again. And one of the things I find is like there have been certain types of folks that have gotten me out of that hookup. And I start to recognize that. So I'm like, all right, I'm about to go into this meeting. This is a person that has a lot of potential to take me out of where I want to be. And so what I'm going to do is set myself up now for recognizing when that's starting to come, reminding myself that I can always pause and or leave. And I think also just reminding myself that I'm in this conversation for a reason. And that I have a lot to give and to share here, and that I wouldn't enter, you know me well enough to know, like, I'm not going to have a meeting for the sake of a meeting ever. But like this is happening for a reason. Here are the goals that are happening for that space. When we get to a moment where that environment is not the environment that's going to be conducive to those goals, and I don't mean the respectability politics. I mean, like, literally, if we are not in a space where this conversation can happen, then I'm gonna go ahead, and so we're ready for it. But it took me, I think, until last year to recognize that what was happening for me when I could no longer see my words was that I wasn't grounded. And then I noticed that my heartbeat was elevated, and I noticed like I'm having the same kind of symptoms that I'm having when I'm working out, sitting and eating with white people in these spaces. And once I recognized that, and also understood the toll that this can take on Black bodies, right? Just even teaching in predominantly white spaces, like for us, for independent schools. And just thinking how that's not attended to. Like, no one in those spaces can tell me, okay, I don't want to say no one. There are not a lot of people in those spaces who can help with that, right? Like, you can engage that kind of growth. And then the more that happens, the less audacious I think you could try to treat, like, oh, like, I don't know, like, I don't know what to do.
Do I have energy for that right now?
Do I have the energy for that right now? So I think everything that I do, I love what you said about presencing your ancestors. That is a practice I've started doing, like, in new spaces, whether it's virtual or in person, just getting people to name who they bring with them into spaces, because that's also, like, something that I do. I love that you have the actual visual elements of it, but, like, I think about the who do we bring into these spaces? Like, I think about my grandmother, who didn't go past 8th grade, but who also told me, like, don't be so smart that you're stupid. I think about, like, all the wisdoms and loves that are not traditional epistemologies that I bring into every space, and I'm reminded that I'm flanked by some powerful, strong people, and that also helps in those conversations too. Like, sometimes it's like remembering who you are and remembering who you bring with you. That can be its own sort of armor.
Yeah, I love that, and it's the remembering and remembering, right? So bringing those members who've kind of contributed to who you are to the table is so important.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, it's interesting. As I'm learning more about my ancestors, my great grandfather was a Bahia from. He was Yoruba in Brazil, and these are people in Brazil who the enslaved, who essentially fought back and were able to get on ships returning to the continent. And my great grandfather did that. And when I think of unchaining some of my shackles, having the audacity to do that, I remember him. I'm like, look, he went, I don't know how many generations of my family were in Brazil, but he fought and then returned to the continent. And so this idea of always returning home to who we are, always returning to that groundedness, I remind myself that I have ancestors who've done that. And so what does it look like for me to do that in this moment? And one of the things that also works for me, other than breathing, is like going for a walk. After that conversation, that whole thing happened, I was like, I need some fresh air. And connecting to nature for me is a really big part. And so if it's touching a tree, and just recognizing that there's energy, that there's life out there, and that I can kind of draw into those life forces to energize myself.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that so much. And I know you are in between big meetings, so you have to go. But the second half of that question was like, what's useful and what's not. And I think that when I think of this past semester, the thing that has been the least useful to me, or the thing that I'm not taking with me into the second semester, is any doubt that creating boundaries around time, space, and needs, any doubt that that is not a selfish thing, I think is what I want to say. I don't think it's selfish. And I had my doubts about it because I know you don't know me in this way work wise, but I have really put boundaries around my time and around work when it happens, and it does not happen at home. Like I have been so good about that. And I've still like doubted myself, even though like this is the most healthy I have been, like physically. Like I schedule my gym time to be at 4:30, which makes me leave work by 4. Like I'm not playing around. I have had my relationship with Lance like has had time and space to move. Like I have time and space to connect with friends, and I still feel guilty that I'm not working but that's not useful and also not helpful. And I still get everything that needs to get done for the most part. Not always on time, but it happens. But I'm leaving behind the guilt that I felt about my past kind of workhorse self that was really given into that capitalist mindset that's like, must work super hard and this is the only way to do it. So anyway, that's what's not useful for me.
Julie, I love that. I feel like, I've sometimes even like I'm not sleeping, and so it's like 1 a.m. I'm like, all right, let me just draft these emails and schedule this in for 8. And so I appreciate that. That's something that I'm going to strive for moving forward. But I guess one of the things that I'm letting go of, I just had an idea, and now it's like, is like the idea, I know, the idea that joy is resistance, and trying to think about where joy comes from. And I mean, I think it is, in the sense that we're resisting oppressive systems, right, that kind of get in the way of us cultivating joy easily, but thinking of it as something that that can be a default for us. Yeah. That tranquility, going back to our authentic self, that like joy is something that is innate, and that we can be in a state of joy for the majority of our time. And seeing that as like a state of restfulness, like radical rest, so that I don't have to work so hard to find joy. Yeah. That I can find joy in the simple things. That's one of it. So I'm trying to let go of it as a source of resistance. Like, oh, I gotta fight for joy. Just be like, what, joy is all around. Yes. And it's easy to access.
Love that. All right. For anyone else that's still watching or will watch this video later, the question is, what are you holding on to coming out of this season and heading into the next, and what's useful and what's not? And the action item that's going to come off of that is to do what Shakira just did. Set an intention, create an intention around what you're going to bring into your next season and what that's going to look like for you. I think the more specific we are, the more likely our bodies, minds, and hearts are to engage that. So, Shakira, thank you so much. And I'm glad. I hope you have a 13-minute transition before your 2 o'clock thing. But thank you so much. I really thought this was going to be 10 minutes, but thank you for
I loved it. No worries. I loved it.
First live with me.
I always love chatting with you. It's always insightful. Thank you so much.
All right. Peace. Take care, Shakira. And thank y'all. Janae Peters. If you liked anything you heard, please don't hesitate to comment, like, subscribe, or support in any of these ways, and especially through your love and care. Peace, and I'll see y'all again soon.